Texas, a state where the horizon melts in the heat and rivers of black gold flow beneath the ground. Here in the city of Odessa, time moves differently. People here are used to hard labor, big money, and even bigger secrets. They say there are only two ways to get rich in Texas: strike oil or marry well. But sometimes the price of such wealth is a human life. This story unfolded over just 25 days. 25 days that turned a strong family into ruins and a wealthy heir into the victim of a cynical plan. At the center of our story is James Carter. Friends and partners simply called him Big Jim. 58 years old, a widower, the owner of a successful construction company, and several oil rigs in the western part of the state. Jim was a man of the old school, tough in business, but trusting with his inner circle. After his first wife passed away, he lived alone for 5 years, dedicating himself entirely to work and occasional meetings with his adult children, a son and a daughter. The children were waiting for their father to retire so they could take over the business. But fate had other plans. Everything changed in the beginning of a sweltering July. James stopped for lunch at an elite golf club on the outskirts of town. There he met her, Melissa, 29 years old, a striking blonde with a dazzling smile who worked there as an administrator. It wasn't just a spark between them, it was a wildfire. Big Jim, who hadn't looked at a woman in years, lost his head. He showered Melissa with gifts, flew her to Dallas for dinner on his private jet, and seemed to grow 20 years younger. His children, of course, sounded the alarm. They saw Melissa as only one thing, a gold digger who was young enough to be his daughter. But Jim wouldn't listen to anyone. Just 2 weeks after they met, he took a shocking step. They flew to Las Vegas and got married in secret. No lavish ceremonies, no prenup. Upon returning to Texas, Jim gathered a family council and announced, "I am happy, and you must accept my choice." And to prove his devotion to his young wife, he took a step that would become fatal for him. He changed his will. Now, in the event of his death, 70% of his entire estate, including the luxurious Red Oak Ranch, would go to Melissa. It was the 3rd week of their acquaintance and the 1st week of their marriage. Melissa suggested to her husband that they get away from the city noise and the judgmental looks of his children. She convinced him to go to that remote ranch, Red Oak, to hunt and spend the weekend just the two of them. The ranch was in the middle of nowhere. Miles of desert and thorny brush separated them from the nearest neighbors. Cell service was practically non-existent there, the ideal place for romance, or for a crime. Saturday evening. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red tones. At 7:45 p.m., a call came into 911. The operator heard hysteria, a woman's scream punctuated by sobbing. "Help! Hurry! It's an accident! The gun! It went off by itself! Jim isn't breathing! Oh my God, he isn't breathing!" By the time police and medics reached the ranch, it was already dark. On the veranda, in a pool of blood, lay Big Jim. Nearby lay a collectible Winchester shotgun. Melissa was sitting next to him, covered in her husband's blood, shaking uncontrollably. She told the sheriff a story that sounded tragic, but plausible. According to her, Jim decided to clean his gun before the morning hunt. He was sitting on the porch, showing her the mechanism, when he turned awkwardly. The gun slipped, the stock hit the floor, and it fired. The bullet struck him directly in the heart. It looked like a classic accident. In Texas, this happens. There are guns in every home, and carelessness kills more often than bandits. The body was taken away, and Melissa, crushed by grief, was sent home. It seemed like the end of the story. The young widow gets millions, the family mourns. But the county sheriff was an old friend of Jim's, and something didn't sit right with him. First, the gun. It was an expensive collector's piece with a triple safety system. The probability of it firing from hitting a wooden floor was incredibly low. Second, Jim himself. He was a fanatic about gun safety. The sheriff knew Jim would never, under any circumstances, clean a loaded weapon. That was the first rule he had drilled into even his own children's heads. A quiet investigation began. Forensics reconstructed the trajectory of the bullet, and that's where Melissa's version cracked. If the gun had fallen and fired from the bottom up, the entry angle would be sharp, but ballistics showed that Jim was shot straight on, from a distance of about 2 or 3 meters. Someone stood across from him and pulled the trigger. Police pulled Melissa's phone records. It turned out that even at the ranch, where there was almost no network, she managed to send short text messages. To whom? A certain Rick.
During questioning, Melissa claimed, "Rick is my stepbrother. He came from Oklahoma to support me. He knows nothing." But detectives dug deeper. A database check revealed that Melissa had no brother. Rick was her ex-husband. Moreover, they weren't even officially divorced. Security cameras at a gas station 20 miles from the ranch captured Rick's old pickup truck an hour before the murder. He was there. The picture began to come together. This wasn't spontaneous passion. This was an operation, a blitzkrieg lasting a month. Melissa was supposed to seduce the rich widower, marry him, force him to rewrite the will, and get rid of him. Rick was the executioner. But they needed ironclad evidence. There was no direct proof against Rick and Melissa, only circumstantial. Rick's gun wasn't found, and there were no witnesses. And then, a habit of Jim's that Melissa didn't know about came to the rescue. Big Jim was a businessman of the old school. He didn't like typing notes into a phone. He carried a small digital recorder in his shirt pocket on which he dictated ideas for construction sites or to-do lists. That evening, the recorder was in his shirt pocket. And at the moment the shot rang out, the device was recording. When forensics managed to extract the audio file, they heard more than just the gunshot. They heard a person running up to the veranda after the roar and the sound of the body falling. The recording clearly picked up a male voice. "It's done. Go on, call 911 and make sure you cry loud. I'm out of here." And then Melissa's voice. "Pick up the shell casing, you idiot." That voice belonged to Brother Rick. The trial was swift. The jury needed less than an hour to reach a verdict. Melissa and Rick received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Their entire perfect scam took less than a month, from the first glass of champagne at the golf club to prison uniforms.
James Carter was looking for love to brighten his old age, but found people for whom his life was worth exactly as much as his oil shares weighed.